So the plan is that this will take around 40 minutes. So we'll finish about 6:10. We'll have a 20-minute break for dinner, and then we will have the Risk and Insurance Committee meeting at 6:30, which is planned. So we can't change that. That's it's
So 6:30 followed by 7:30. Yeah. So, yeah. But there's no expectation for people, elected members who aren't part of the Risk and Insurance, unless you want, because I envisage that our 6:30 meeting probably won't take too long. So if there was a desire to resume a portion of this, yeah, I mean that's your call, really.
Yeah. We'll see how we go. Look, so this is the first iteration, if you like, of the Maori engagement framework. This is a workshop, and as you see, we've got members of the public here, and it is being live streamed and recorded. So it just wanted to mention that it is the first conversation that we have around this. We're not making any decisions today as such. We are just giving the Chief Executive some guidance around next steps and outcomes that we want to see happen down the track. But obviously, free and frank discussion is called for. Opinions and views are being sought, so don't. That feedback. It can't sort of, through the whole process, we've got to be pretty open and transparent about our views and make sure that they are heard. So with that, Brent and Monique are going to take us through this presentation, which will be up on their portals, or not yet? Not yet. Okay.
No, it won't be, because Brent and I wrote it this morning. And that's not because it's not important work, but I'd said to Brent to wait for me to come back to prepare for today. So just in terms of the kind of a reminder about why we're here, and bring you back to the council plan on a page, which I can't see, but that's okay, this is just visual reference, is to obviously remind council that one of our 5 key community outcomes is partnership with tangata whenua, and then also to remind council that in your other areas of focus, which is like basically your second list of things you want done that didn't quite fit in the top 10 priorities, you have a priority around developing a Māori engagement framework. And so today is the very start of that conversation. So I do want to emphasise it's the start. We will not finish it today. The purpose of the workshop is to touch on our responsibilities and the why. It is to seek some guidance from elected members, though, on scope, approach and outcomes. We're wanting to hear your perspectives as elected members, so that you can set the tone for this work before we even start it. And ultimately, what Brent and I are looking for is enough feedback in order to inform a project brief. So that would be us going away and writing a project brief so that we can return to elected members for you to endorse a piece of work. Our community outcome partnership with tangata whenua, I do just want to encourage you to take some time to read this. So this is the statement, this is the commitment we've made, that we uphold Te Tiriti Waitangi and its principles and recognise the role of mana whenua as kaitiaki of their rohi. We support them to maintain and enhance tikanga with their ancestral lands and waterways, wahitapu and other tanga, and build mutually respectful partnerships with tangata whenua, supporting whānau, marae, hapu and iwi in achieving their aspirations. Now that's a pretty bold statement. It's a really ambitious statement, and it's a statement that no doubt will resonate with many of you. But what will kind of start unfolding in the next 40 minutes or so, but in the weeks and months to follow, is how do we actually bring that to life, and how do we have confidence that we have a strategy in place that, led by our elected members, gives officers the mandate to deliver on this through quality, genuine engagement. At the risk of kind of drawing your attention to a whole lot of pieces of statute, often what we know is that the Crown has an obligation to the Treaty of Waitangi directly. The Local Government Act speaks to the purpose of the Treaty of Waitangi, but often councils get associated as the Crown, and I think that's a piece of work that we'll need to explore, and we'll need your guidance on in the coming months about what you see our role. But just reminding you that we've kind of already made a statement about what we think our role is, where we've committed in a community outcome to upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi and its principles. But from a legislative point of view, we've got a number of statutory responsibilities to Māori. Some of that is really, really specific, and some of that is more inferred in the way that it refers to Māori, or refers to engagement, or refers to the Treaty of Waitangi. And this is not everything. There'll be others, but this is the legislation which we often refer to in our day-to-day work. The why, so we can talk about our community outcomes and we can talk about our statutory responsibilities, but to set the scene for the start of this conversation, why should we engage with Māori? Well, obviously, a greater understanding of one another's expectations and aspirations, increased opportunities to establish shared projects and joint ventures through collective outcomes. There's this notion of improved processes based on an understanding of one another's priorities, expectations, and available resources. More efficient and effective use of council and Māori resources, and some of you will reflect on that, where council historically maybe sat in some reactive spaces where ideally we'd like to shift to a proactive space. But ultimately we think about that community outcome, which is about supporting Māori expectations and aspirations in order to promote wellbeing of Māori, but ultimately our community. The Te Arawhiti, which is the Māori Crown Relations Department,
Apologies. There's these points. There's obviously our legal obligations, but there's also strategy, like strategically. Like, let's take O2NL for an example. The benefit of us being able to work collaboratively will have far better outcomes overall for our communities. When we think about, environmental issues, resource consents, and delays which cost more money, if we continue to strengthen our partnerships, those things ought to go more smoothly, cost less, and we're not always ending up in court. So there's a range of why we would want to do this.
And this is the start of a why, but expanding on that why and ensuring elected members are connected and kind of articulate the why, that's really important. The basis of these bullet points was just to frame the conversation a little bit, but you're right, Councillor Tokapo, those are really, really important points. What we, and I might actually go to this first and then I'll click back. One of the, other than the fact that Council have said, let's create a Māori engagement framework, I kind of step back from that and it's why? And so I'm going to talk about a little bit of what I see as the missing jigsaw puzzle. So we have Te Tiriti, we have some statutory responsibilities and legislation. As a council, we've set a community outcome around partnership with tangata whenua. And then we have this policy called the Māori Contribution to Decision Making Policy, which I think through the LTPA process at times we called something different, but you all know what policy I'm referring to. And that is a legislative requirement, and it's a policy that's been in place since 2002, 2016, sometime in the 2000s when the legislation required us to have it. And then within the organisation, we've got a range of things happening to enable engagement. The Tūhono Toolkit, we've got a cultural competency program, and you're all aware of the range of partnership agreements or different projects or pieces of work that we have underway with iwi hapu and marae. But what's missing is, and it's not just because you happen to call it a Māori engagement framework in your plan on a page, but what's missing is actually the strategic guidance from you as elected members that says this is how we bring our aspirations around the community outcome of partnership with tangata whenua alive, and this is the framework and the essentially the scope of when we say Māori contribution to decision making is important, and this is what people can expect from us, the how we'll do that. And I'll talk a little bit soon around what I think some key elements of a Māori engagement framework could look like. But if I just go back to the values of engagement, right now as a council, I don't think we can necessarily articulate when we say engagement or when we say partnership, what do we mean? And Te Arawhiti, they have some really clear values of engagement that they expect from every government organisation when they're engaging with Māori, what values drive and guide that. And so I've provided this here today. Again, this isn't to finalise anything, but it's to spark a conversation. So when government are engaging with Māori, it's guided by the values of partnership, participation, protection, the 3 Ps that underpin the treaty, the recognition of cultural values, and the use of mana enhancing processes. And I wanted to refer to these today because I think that as we guided through a piece of work around what Horowhenua District Council's Māori engagement framework might look like, we might want to refer back to this guidance in time to see how or where that sits with us. In terms of our current status at HDC, maybe I should have put that last bullet point first. We're trying and we have a really good intent, but we do have inconsistent approaches. There is a capacity and capability deficit, whether that be in the organisation or with what we expect and the expectations we put on iwi and hapu. There's often a lack of understanding. There's certainly fear of doing it wrong. We put unrealistic timeframes on Māori because of the significant timeframes we often have against us, or because we're not clear on when engagement should occur. And often there's no understanding of expectations about the who and the how and the when. And we obviously are in pre-settlement context, and that does shape some of our status. And you'll all have a view on this. This is me putting some words up to help frame a conversation. But again, going through this process, trying to describe what is our current status, what is the problem and the opportunity we're trying to solve. That's something we're really keen to hear from elected members on. So, in our significance and engagement policy, not in our Māori contribution to decision making policy, but in our significance and engagement policy, and this is a method that is used by many institutes all around the world, is the notion of there's always a continuum of engagement, and part of what I've heard from elected members, but what I also hear from iwi and hapu is that when we use the words around engagement and partnership or consultation, we're not necessarily clear when we use those words on what we mean. We can often use that word as an action or a transaction rather than because we could be talking about engaging with, I think a really good example is the upcoming engagement we're going to be doing around the Foxton Beach freeholding account. We've talked about engaging with Māori, but do we mean inform? Do we mean consult? Do we mean involve? Do we mean collaborate? Do we mean co-lead? And as elected members, in the absence of a Māori engagement framework, we don't actually have, as officers, the kind of the rules to how you want us to, where on this continuum do you want us to sit for particular, whether it be for particular kaupapa or whether it be for a particular partnership. I think another example more recently where we've probably seen this is around property disposal decision, where there was, there's been some conversations, some questions, and not actually clear mandate around the table about, well, when we talk about consulting, what did we actually mean? Did we just mean an email? Because I think that's what we did mean, but we used the word consult. Or did we mean an invitation to, it's not here as an example, but, like sit on the decision-making working party around who that land might have been sold to. So again, like not to try solve it, but this is all just context building for the opportunities that exist around Māori engagement framework.
Minnie,
yeah.
Can I just ask, so it's about building a common language as well, so that partners can say, well, our level of expectation is that on this we are involved or we collaborate or we're informed. So that having a common language that's reflected through ultimately partnership agreements and those kind of things is where we're heading. Is that
well in in a few slides time I'm going to turn the table and I'm going to hopefully get you to do a whole lot of talking, because that's really for you as elected members to set the tone on. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is I think that currently we're silent on some of that, and that's where we have different expectations between different parties when we use the word engage or consult or partnership. I think in a I've been asked this question a number of times, like what does partnership mean to council? And I'm hopeful that through this work we could define what do we mean by partnership, because partnership, if we go around the table right now, we'll all have a different definition of it. And there's one hapu member that has asked me this on a number of times, and I can't answer that question because other than a Māori contribution to decision-making policy and a community outcome that says we are committed to partnership, in the absence of the rules of the game that says, well, partnership means that we're up for this, we're up for co-leading. Or our view is that partnership means we'll consult with you on everything. Keep talking.
But partnership is that it could involve any of those.
And that's what your framework might do, right? Is it might say that it's across this continuum. And I don't want to predetermine the scope that council might be open to, but you might say, well, actually, no, we're going to take that out. We don't think informing is part of the tools of the game. Or there might be something on the other end of the spectrum where you might say, actually, we're not up for that. And I think that's what the Māori engagement framework allows you to do as elected members. But I'm going to talk soon about how we might get there. You set the expectation for council officers about this is how we're going to bring the community outcome of partnership with tangata whenua alive.
Just on the idea of partnership, I've saw it. The idea of partnership in regards to the treaty, if you come across the idea that it's actually constitutionally impossible for subjects of the Crown to be in partnership with the Crown. Just for a thought. And to be fair, and I don't mind getting out there and saying it, I think we're considering all this in the light of basically historical revisionism. So those are just a couple of thoughts.
So I'm just going to keep working through the slides, ask questions at any time, but as I'm kind of going through it, what I'm wanting you to think about is what's the tone that we're going to give Monique at the, like what's the sense we're going to give Monique so that she knows what she's going away and doing in terms of starting to scope this work. And if it feels like this is really loose, that's because we haven't done the work, because it wouldn't be appropriate for us to do the work, because it's important that as elected members you set the tone, but you also think about the role that iwi, hapu and marae play in setting the tone for this work as well.
That one there, yeah. I mean, that's a little bit dated as a technique for engaging with iwi. Even Te Arawhiti have a different model where they have 3 boxes, which is collaborate, co-design and empower, which is very different to that. It's more about the partnership and being involved in that intimate level with each organisation, whereas this is very much an engineering approach to this is how we're going to manipulate the process and keep people at arm's length and get to the decision we want. So we need to sort of take on some of these newer models.
That's great feedback, and that's the sort of conversations we want elected members to have through this process. Helpfully, I'm going to present you that framework, the Te Arawhiti one. And again, like I'm not trying to provide the answers, I'm just trying to provide a whole lot of context in order to shape some conversation. Like what would a Māori engagement framework do? Well, ultimately, as the CE, what I'd like it to achieve is articulating who we should engage with, how we should engage, and when engagement should take place. But I'm really mindful of us not getting ahead of ourselves and ensuring that iwi hapu have a role in shaping the scope of the framework. But that's a question I'm going to ask you soon about what role, how you think that should take place. So picking up on the more modern and the advice that Te Arawhiti give about, well, moving on from that IAP2 model into more of a Māori lensed approach, they talk about the 4-step process. So first of all, what is the kaupapa? So understanding the scope of the matter, how that. Oh, sorry, got a bit. What is the kaupapa, and recognising that often how in an IAP2 model we often look at the issue, not the impact or the outcome. The kaupapa approach looks at your 4 well-beings and is always looking for the connection between those 4. Moving to who to engage with, and our Māori engagement framework will majority of the time look at local, but often it will have a connection to regional. But this in itself would need to be expanded significantly more in order to understand overlapping layers of interest and the spatial the relationship between the spatial nature of how iwi hapu and whānau and those who don't whakapapa to Horowhenua but are still Māori and we have an obligation to ensure that they've got the opportunity to contribute to decision making as well.
I think the words I would look at using is to
better intimately understand our partner and all the, I suppose, machinations within that organisation as well. I think a lot of councils just look at a Maori organisation as an iwi, as one single entity. They operate and behave exactly the same as a council would, but they don't. There's many different drivers and issues going on within that entity that we don't understand, but we need to take the time to understand, and all the issues and troubles that they're going through, we need to understand better, I suppose, and all the different components that make up that iwi.
Yeah, and currently the Māori contribution to decision-making policy lists these are all our partners and this is who we'll engage with, but it doesn't actually provide the guidance that says, well, in this part of the district we'll engage with these people, or we'll engage with all, or whether we engage at an iwi level or a hapu level or a marae level. We're silent on that, and my observation is that the silence on that puts us in a position as officers where, we have found ourselves and we continue to find ourselves in situations where there's been no justification, no consistent justification in terms of a strategic document from this council that says this is who we should engage with.
I know you go.
I was just going to say, but that level of detail, in my mind, should sit in individual partnership agreements, because you might have an overarching sort of view of that, but the detail about who to speak to around what should be based on a discussion around expectations that's then captured in a partnership agreement. That's my perspective on it, because there will be there's different solutions for different issues and different contexts, which are better reflected in a customized, fit-for-purpose partnership agreement. Yeah, that
would be nice. It's all black and white and laid out like that, but it never is. And that's why I say you've got to know your partner better and understand all the components of that organisation that we're working with. And it's about also approaching engagement from that mana enhancing perspective, and realising that there are layers of different people and different components, hapu or whānau, that you have to talk to. But you will start with probably an overriding iwi organisation or an overriding organisation, and as long as you know all the components of that iwi, you can, when you make those initial engagement approaches, you can say, well, we recognise we have to talk to this hapu, we may have to talk to this marae as well. Is that okay with you? I suppose it's taking a different approach to how you engage, rather than that sort of formal legal black and white, we've got an agreement, we're going to talk to you but no one else.
Which brings me to the burning question I've got in my mind is, we could sit here and perhaps do some high level engagement, or set some high level things we're trying to set here, but it seems to me that do we need to go and have those conversations to allow us to develop those? Put the horse before the cart instead of the cart before the horse. And I guess because my time on council here, it's long been challenged that we don't consult right with iwi hapu Māori in general. But then we come into, and Jonathan's touched on there, we do, but we constantly reminded of quite often that you're not talking to the right people, they'd speak for us. There's all that. There's all those things that's where I say bring them into the room. Yeah, let's have those conversations to allow us to set these objectives.
I don't think it's a case of coming back to that point of, are we talking to the right person all the time? It's about us being knowledgeable of how their world works. And so I take, for my role when I go out as a scientist and work in a different area with a different iwi, I make sure I know everything about their iwi. I make sure I know who all their hapu are. I make sure I know which whānau are supportive of what I'm trying to do and which whānau might not be. I want to know exactly where they are in their treaty settlement space. I want to know where they are with all their different organisations and companies, so I can go in completely prepared when I engage with them. And I don't think we do that enough. We don't. I mean, how many people here could actually name all the hapu associated with Ngāti Kaukau? Even I would have trouble with it.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the level of knowledge we have to get to as an organisation, I suppose.
So I'm just going to work through this because I want to get to the nub of kind of what I'm seeking from you today. So that there's the how to engage bit, which Jonathan is exactly what you mentioned before around the 5-step model: the inform, consult, collaborate, partner, co-design, and then empower. And that is far more relevant in a Māori lens than the IAP2 model, which is what Council has traditionally used, because that is what, if you go read our significance and engagement policy, that's what we refer to, and that's what every council in New Zealand refers to, because when we all were required to first write a significance and engagement policy, that was the model that was, I think, sold to every council. And then the when should you engage? And so we know that early engagement is a key principle for effective engagement, but I'm not sure that we're really clear about when we say early engagement, what we mean. So in my mind, those 4 things are key fundamentals to a Māori engagement framework, but this is very early in the conversation, and what we need as officers is to hear your perspective as elected members, because we need you to set the tone for us. You have said developing a Māori partnership framework is important, but we are seeking your advice, your feedback, but ultimately your permission to take the flavour of whatever conversation is going to occur here, and maybe there needs to be more conversation so that we can establish a really early project brief to bring this back to Council for endorsement. The governance leadership on this through the lens of partnership is critical, because it's not fair as officers for us to pick up a piece of paper that says develop a Māori partnership framework, go have a whole lot of conversations with iwi hapu, raise the expectation that it's this when actually you all thought it was this. We're keen to hear your views on what is developing a working party with representation of elected members, iwi and hapu partners, to work with staff to develop the draft framework and the scope. What are your thoughts on that? And then just emphasising, not getting ahead of ourselves as just council, but thinking about how do we develop this in step with iwi and hapu partners. The reason we're having this first conversation is because I need to know that before we go have any conversation, that as governors you've had the conversation together and given us a bit of a sense about what do we mean when we say a Māori engagement framework. And so the actions from here, it's blank, and that's because we do need elected members to set the tone on this. We need you to talk to us about what's on your mind. When you committed to developing a Māori partnership framework, what did you think that would be? But we're particularly keen to hear your perspective on the idea of a working party with representation from iwi and hapu, keen to hear your views around mandate and we're ultimately just wanting to listen so that we can get a sense of the flavour.
Oh, cool. This is a cool taki. Oh, taki means issue. No, I think it's exciting. That we actually get to have this conversation. But I suppose a starting point for me, and I actually want to support comments that were made earlier as well, but I actually think we need to know as a council where the directions come from for a start. So, this is not a council initiative because council want to do it. This is a council initiative because council have been directed to do it. And what I mean by that, Monique, is the guys that were in Christchurch with me will attest when Minister Parker made it extremely clear that they won't be helping you with us, with our relationship problems with iwi and hapu. He made that really clear. He said it's up to local government
to determine how and what that looks like, but they will be delivering it. So that for me is the first clarity that our Māori constituents need to know, that this is a central government initiative and we are being asked to carry it out. The next part of it for me was around the framework. One thing I've learned really quickly on a lot of the stuff I've been involved in is, and I heard it here, don't put the cart before the horse, and I sort of feel a little bit like that. I think what's been presented is actually a really great starting point, but it's almost at a point where you could almost not hand it over, sorry, but work with now our Māori constituents to say, are we even on track with how we've identified what's been presented here today, and then get a real quick snapshot from them about is there any fatal flaws? Are there any red flags? Are there other things that can complement the starting point? Because the other part I said here and I wrote as I wrote and I thought it was interesting. So we employ cultural team. So I sort of wonder what role they will play in this process. Because this is stuff that they could be taking directly to our iwi partners as a leader, if that's what the role of them is. But then I'm also sitting here thinking, what's mine and Councillor Horowhenua's role in this, and how we support it, because we're two different tiers. The next part I'm going to say you might not like, but it is around capacity, and like the Minister said, actually say look after yourself. And so I'm sitting here as a part of that, and I'm struggling to articulate this to you. But every council is going to struggle to find the resource to provide the capacity that iwi hapu feel like they need to be effective in this relationship and in this space. And I don't know what the mechanism is to unlock that resource that takes away from other parts of our community that just don't get it. But what I do consider is that we're in a rates conversation. How much money is generated from Māori land, Māori owned properties, Māori owned businesses, te mea, that is mixed up in the pool of the pool? And how could that support council to actually deliver on what we're sitting here talking? And the reason I said that was because it was coming from a Māori component of our district, so to speak, and maybe that's a way we can give back to that sector to support what they need to do. So that's just me sharing an idea off the cuff. I'll probably stop there and just join in as others give comment, but that sort of was my starting point about, setting the direction from the start where it's come from.
So, very, very early stages, I get that, Monique. This is very much about trying to set a high level, and where do we sit at the highest possible level in terms of engagement. I get that. I think for me, and I take on board Justin's point about getting a bit of a heads up from Hapu Iwi. How are they perceiving things at the moment? That would be useful to know. I also wonder too about where the training, the Te Tiriti training day sits in this, because for me that would be a useful foundation so that we actually have our head around robust information about our history and about our treaty, so that we can use that as a springboard for a discussion. My concern is about lining up the ducks. That we're getting this discussion, even though it's meant to be high level. I think really, to me, that is an essential first step, is to have that training. And to me, if there's one thing that we need a full table at, it's committing to that one-day training, because that's something that I think every elected member needs to be there to listen to that, to understand that, and to interrogate that as well. But to me, that's essential. So I guess I hope that doesn't sound too waffly, but I guess it's about getting that training and that understanding in place before we go too far.
Just for clarity's sake, just for clarity's sake, so transparency and all of that. I'll flag right now. I won't be attending that training, just so that's out there, and that's a choice.
I reckon you need it most, Mike. I reckon you need it most.
Well, that's I don't actually think I do. I've got a pretty good understanding of the treaty, and it's a fairly simple contract between two peoples. The point about I can no more be a partner with the Crown as a British subject than anyone. If partnership is a possibility, then I'm in a partnership with the Crown, but obviously I'm not. So the whole thing, it seems to me, is pretty much based on historical revisionism. I wasn't there. None of us were there. Do we know what they were thinking? Do we know what they thought they were signing? And that includes Europeans as well as Maori. We weren't there. We don't know. It seems to me the treaty has been revised in our current times to actually, and what it's achieving is creating divisiveness. I take your point, Justin, when you talked about, to have a look at, Maori ratepayers in terms of what they contribute. But that's just further divisiveness. We're all in this together. What they contribute to is the pool that we all can contribute to for the betterment of all. You can, Rogan, you think I need it the most. Well, that's very generous of you, and that's a point of view. Change my mind. These are my thoughts, and I'm just putting it out there. But right now, we're in an age of where you could say, this is what I think, is things are being re-represented to suit particular agendas. So I don't. And in terms of the cultural competency, well, I don't feel the need to explain it, but I'm quite happy to share my thoughts on that one. Is that the idea that I have to be competent in someone else's culture is kind of a little bit mildly insulting to me personally, because it implies that I'm not. But there's no requirement for any of us, regardless of our ethnic background, to be competent in anyone else's culture. Are we going to do cultural competency for the Chinese and Indian communities? So it's an all or nothing thing. We're either all in this together or we're not. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a framework to set a better relationship with iwi. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I think personally that the whole modern revisionism of the treaty has led us to this place where it's actually creating more divisiveness than not. Change my mind.
Could I just sort of add on to that? Thank you, Mike, for your honesty too. I think that's actually really impressive for me. I was actually just going to go on to say that because I know council struggle with the terminology partnership, and I suppose if there's anything I can do now is try and share maybe a model of partnership. And Ronnie, I don't know whether you're aware of it or not, but any partnership takes a two-way street. It's reciprocal, isn't it? And it's at home with your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever it is. There's a way in which you conduct yourself. And so I just wanted to allude really that, Te Ahua Tūranga adopted a framework, which is the Manawatu Highway. And I'll just share how that came about, because iwi were sitting in a room with Waka Kotahi, basically being told about a framework that they wanted us to work within, and iwi were pretty quick to say, well, that framework doesn't work for us. And so a new framework was designed, and the framework was actually designed around waka tangata. And so waka tangata is a tūha waka. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is because what we learned really quickly in partnerships, to bring two worlds together you need to have shared values, you need to have shared principles, and when you find those shared and agreed values and principles, they become the lashings of your waka. So here you have your Western waka, here you have your waka Maori, and then you need to join those wakas together. And what bridges those wakas is exactly what I said. It's your shared values and principles that you all can live by. Once that wakas are bridged, you now can put a house on that waka, and in that house comes rules about how we live together. Shared rules, shared values, and so the journey I'm taking us on is that waka now becomes not just a vehicle of a project, this actually now becomes a vehicle of the people. And so that waka won't leave shore until all parties are happy that the waka's prepared, they know their destination, they're loaded with what they need to get to that journey, and then that waka will set sail. Part of that setting sail is nominating your captain, nominating your navigator, nominating your cook, nominating your fishermen, all those people that are going to be on that waka to make it livable while you're on your journey. And then you set off on your waka, and with the guidance of those people you've appointed, you end up at your destination. So I'm just sharing that because I hope it may resonate with some whānau here to understand the concept of partnership and how partnership could be explored by this council moving forward. And I hope it helps. If it doesn't, I've wasted your time. But if it does help, then maybe it gives us a better understanding of, perhaps what it is we as a council are trying to achieve as part of this journey.
I think nail hit firmly on top of the head for me. Thanks, Justin. And I think that sets the pathway for me is that we need to have that conversation to form the strategy. However that occurs, I don't think we can do it any other way. Have the conversation first, set the strategy, and adopt it.
I agree with your working party. I think just do it. Get it started. It's going to take a long time. Just as Te Arawhiti says, it's going to be a long process. It's going to take time. You're going to need the time to go through this process to take account of everyone's views. Everyone's at both ends of the spectrum, I suppose, and come up with something that's going to propel us forward, because as much as I pain to say this, looking back is not going to get us anywhere. We have to look forward. We have to come up with some new initiatives ourselves for our community, find those local solutions, and we have to have everyone in our community involved. But for me, the reason to do this is simple, is that if I look 5 years out from now, if Three Waters goes ahead with all the new acts coming out, they're all very specific around having equal representation on whatever governance groups are created. Three Waters has already said there'll be equal mana whenua representation on the new entity for this area. The spatial planning draft bill, is it, or act, or whatever it's going to be, is going to have regional planning committees which will have mana whenua representation on them equally as well. And there's all sorts of new initiatives around Te Manaroa Te Wai. There's one for whenua coming out as well that we're going to have to grapple with. And I think a lot of the things that we talk about and a lot of things that we deal with are always behind casting and looking back. We need to be a bit more proactive going forward if we want to do a good job for all of our community.
Can you go back to slide number 3, I think, where you've put up the example of Crown? Yeah, this one. So, look, from my perspective, you replace Crown with Council, and that's pretty much it. That's what my ideal view looks like. I think the start of the conversation is similar to what Justin spoke about. I'm hesitant to begin a framework discussion without a blank piece of paper, and I'd be really keen for us to have a discussion or a hui and provide that wider down to individual, down to hapu, down to iwi level, to say what does it look like from your perspective. Because when we talk in partnership, we talk about what they want and what we want. And I think that's the point of starting the conversation to develop the framework, that we then get to a point where we've got to. And I think it's really important, and Justin, you might be able to remind me of the word. I'm really cognizant of the splintering within iwi and the dynamics that happen at times, that we do have some whānau and some hapu that are splintered from the iwi, and we have individuals who are our ratepayers that identify as Maori but do not recognise MTA as their authority to speak on their behalf, at the same time that they don't recognise somebody else's authority. That we need to make sure that whatever framework we land on still allows a degree of partnership framework arrangement, allows for that input as well.
Yeah, just the last thing I'd like to just add to that, in terms of the idea of co-governance, especially in regard to three orders, when a Minister of the Crown says that he believes that democracy is actually an academic concept and that the governance of three orders was never meant to be democratic, and it's not, then I think we've got bigger problems than coming up with a framework group. To be honest, democracy is democracy. And once you go down this is just a view, and again, change my mind by all means. Once you go down the road of the democracy being negotiable or something that you can tinker with, it's not democracy anymore. We talk a lot about democracy. So yeah.
And so that's why it's so important we're having this conversation, right? Because there'll be different perspectives around the table, and wherever we land is about the majority of council giving direction on, when we say partnership with tangata whenua, this is what we mean, and therefore this is the framework we're going to put in place. So, appreciate and acknowledge the different perspectives around the table, because it's important that we hear that.
Honest reaction is, I feel like this conversation is now a bit rushed because we're now up against some timelines, and I don't think we've got the space, or I feel like it might compromise the various contributions that might want to be had, because we feel time limited and we won't have the time or space to be able to explain a range of perspectives, because it's not just one thing. And so I mean, I'm conscious of what Jonathan suggested around getting on with the working party, but I feel like it might just be worthwhile including for the occasion of this team, to just pause momentarily, come back and have more of a conversation, to then give you, to be fair to you and your team, around giving you quite clear direction. Because I would personally be very uncomfortable if you went away based on just the contributions you've heard from different parties tonight and went down with a particular course. So that's where I sit.
I would respond in two ways. I'd respond to that by saying the council staff, in an operational context, do need to make progress and move on. They do need to have something there to guide them. And I think it's up to them as the organisation to follow their path to find that themselves. We can provide some guidance. I think as governance, we should just say, yeah, get on with it. Something needs to happen in that space. Create some ideas, come up with some frameworks, some policies, whatever, and come back to us with it. And alongside that, as a council, we need to have those discussions, like you say. But I don't think that we should hold back one part of the organisation. I mean, we all have a lot of learning to do around this table, and we all want to share our views and have a say. But I think council, as elected members, should have a different framework, a different policy, or something different than what the organisation should have. They should both work together. But I mean, the organisation's going to have to make some advances in this space to keep up with the changes that are going to happen around the new legislation and Three Waters. If we keep holding them back, waiting for it before our council or as governance to come up with what our idea of partnership or how we recognise different aspects of our community, we'll be pontificating for ages about that.
On to that, Jonathan says, is that the council of the day does set the direction for the organisation, acknowledging obviously that there are constraints and directions that come through legislative frameworks, and and that's where I think we differ in terms of our approaches to it, because for me that yes, there is elements of the framework already in place in terms of what happens on a day-to-day basis, what we have in terms of relationship agreements, resourcing agreements, those kind of things. This feels for me more like a process of a bit of a reset or a bit of an opportunity to look hard at ourselves, but also our partners, to actually be given the opportunity to be really clear about the expectations of council. But we've got to get the ground rules right first. That's to me what this framework is about. Is not setting the ground rules. That's probably the wrong word. It's more a view of how we see it working. Not saying it is that way. This is from our perspective of the council of the day. This is how we see it working. Acknowledging that yes, things will change. Yes, legislation will change. But yeah.
Councillor Jennings, I think what I'm hearing from you is when you're talking about time, you're acknowledging that we've got a meeting that's supposed to start at 6:30, aren't you? Yeah. So, I don't think Councillor Jennings is referring to kind of time as in months and months. Yeah.
I was just really checking into Monique, picking up on Jonathan's view that have you got enough of a steer to continue to progress work at an officer level? No?
No, I don't think we do at all.
Okay.
And that's okay, because if I start with like this, we're starting the conversation, we won't finish it today. Like, this is a really important piece of work. One of your 5 community outcomes is partnership with tangata whenua. One of the key things you want to achieve this term is developing a framework. If we'd left today with all clarity and all on the same page about what that meant and how we were going to do it, I don't think that was ever going to happen. It feels like we've got to have more conversation. But what I'm at least trying to get a sense of is that when you agreed on a Māori partnership framework, based on kind of what I've put up on the wall today, acknowledging there's been no engagement with iwi and hapu on this, because this is me kind of seeking permission. This is me making sure that I don't set ourselves up to fail and don't go have a conversation about this when you all meant this. Like, is there allergic reactions? Or are we genuinely on the same page about what we might mean about a Māori partnership framework? And I'm not sure that. I feel like there's way more conversation. I love your confidence in me, Councillor Proctor, but this must be led by governance. You have to own and drive the vision of what you mean by partnership with tangata whenua.
I think the cultural competency trainings are a good idea. I think I'd quite just the same way as I've been out and had a look at wastewater and stuff like that, because if I reflect on the number of marae that I've been on site in the Horowhenua, I've been onto more maraes outside of Aotearoa than I have here. And that will obviously form part of a journey moving forward. But that's what I'd be looking forward to, getting a more intimate understanding of Aotearoa right here in that space.
Monique, all I was going to say is that if you go back to your very first slide, which talks about community outcomes, it's that one there. I mean, that in itself is a discussion in itself, because at the moment this council table has inherited that community outcome. There is an opportunity through the long-term plan next year to change those community outcomes. And so I would have thought that one of the first conversations is actually ensuring that there's buy-in and acceptance that that's the starting point in terms of the outcome that we're trying to achieve. And so for me, that's part of the conversation that we can't and won't be able to have tonight, but is just testing that this council of the day is still supportive of that particular community outcome. But absolutely.
Yeah, I'll echo Councillor Proctor that I don't think we should be a roadblock here, but we definitely haven't given Monique enough to do anything. But I do think that, this should be co-designed. This isn't something that we should do in a prescriptive manner. This conversation itself is prescriptive and doesn't involve our partners at all. The people want to be involved at the start. This is the start. So let's involve them in whatever the next step is. A working party seems like a good direction forward. Maybe a vague initial presentation like this with a set of questions about what a partnership might look like is as good as we can go as a direction from here. But
I think that's a good starting point to introduce to AU partners. Certainly, because I know that if council go back to them now, they're going to ask you the same question, and then when they say, and then you're going to ask what's the policy, and they're going to say it's already embedded, which is the treaty. But it's what does that look like to us as elected members, and I think you shared that on a couple of slides later. That said, here are the statutory obligations of us to our treaty partners. And so I'm a little bit like John too. I think there's a good opportunity to start a working party and at least engage. Part of this presentation, and I pick up on what Clint said too. He's been at all the Te Tumata Kauki Hui, and I do resonate when they say bring us a blank paper. But in saying that would be a little bit facetious of us to do that. And again, I'll go back to the steer, where it comes from, and I reiterate that. We are being delegated this responsibility as a local council, and we need to tell them that. And so that's where I'm at. I don't know if it helps Monique, but I definitely would like to assist if I can, and make those connections. And as John said, how far down do you go? Who do you go to? But I think we've got some good starting points that we can engage to at least open the conversation and assist you guys moving forward.
I'm sorry to break the conversation up. We've got 1 minute till we're supposed to start a risk and insurance committee meeting, and I'm wondering there needs to be further conversation amongst us, obviously, in terms of even the next stages and what we do and how we do it, and understanding a little more about that. And So can we find some time maybe next week to do that? I'm not sure what the plan is for next Wednesday, but hopefully we can find a little bit more time to have a discussion around that, because obviously the conversation's far bigger than, we've created a little ball at the moment, but we're going to create this great rolling boulder by the end of it. And so we need to really thresh a few things out, don't we, in terms of that. Not thresh them out, but...
Look, we can certainly find additional workshop time. And what I'd ask elected members to kind of reflect on and think about between today and then is, like, what is the direction you're wanting to give us as officers about your preparedness and openness to what this could look like, because that's ultimately what we're trying to capture, is how big is our permission envelope. And when I use an envelope, I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about when we think about spectrum of partnership, what do we actually mean, and making sure that as elected members, while you might not all agree, that there is general consensus about this is the work that we know that Monique and her team are going to do, and this is how they're going to do it. But ultimately, a Māori engagement framework is going to need to be adopted by this table. It's not something I'd sign off as chief executive. It's something you would own. And so, if you're going to own it, what is it that you're wanting to set it up to success for?
Just from me, can I have a copy of that presentation? Because I've written a whole lot of notes, but I need to know what my thoughts are. Kia ora.
I'm going to make a last comment and just say I'm giving you a blank paper and go ask our partners what they think a partnership document should look like.
Just to flag quickly, if it's okay. So Ashley, for example, Ashley Grayson and myself are going to meet with Hayden tomorrow to have a conversation about the Fox and Beach freeholding account, and very much that conversation about what would good partnership look like in this space as part of the review of how that freeholding account is managed. So that's, as Monique mentioned in terms of examples, that's a very real one where we as officers are going out to start that conversation, but ultimately need to have the views of the table in terms of how that should be set up.
So maybe those that aren't on the Risk Insurance Committee go and have some dinner. If the first section of this meeting hopefully won't take too long, so that those that are party to that will still have some food left when we finish before the next one at 7:00.